Hello, my name is Amy Natt, and I am the CEO of Aging Outreach Services, and this is All Things Aging.
And I'm Amy Phariss, Editor-in-Chief of OutreachNC, our monthly publication. And today we're talking about the many sides of downsizing.
Yeah, so we're going to change things up a little bit today, and I'm actually going to interview Amy. She wrote an article for the magazine about downsizing, so she's really done the research and has the experience. So we'll just do a little role reversal today.
Okay.
All right. So tell me what it means when people talk about downsizing.
So generally, downsizing for seniors means the process of moving from like a larger home to a smaller, more manageable living situation. That might be a condo. It might be moving into like a care facility. It might be just moving into a smaller home.
Okay.
But usually it's going from bigger to smaller.
Okay. And what are some of the reasons that somebody might downsize, especially as somebody is getting older or retiring or whatever the factors may be? What are some of those reasons that they might choose to do that?
So one of the biggest reasons is maintenance.
Okay.
A lot of people just don't want the upkeep of a large home.
I don't want it now.
A large yard. I know. I'm like, when can I move? So, they find themselves wanting to use their time differently or not having the energy and resources to keep up with the maintenance of a large home.
Makes sense.
Finances. Sometimes downsizing, not all the time, but sometimes downsizing can be less expensive. My mom downsized to a smaller home and it was more expensive.
Okay.
But because she moved to a different area.
Well, I was going to say, or sometimes the retirement communities that are smaller might have other fees associated. So I can see where it might be more in some situations.
So in some situations, people want the sale of their home, and then they can apply that to a smaller place with a lower payment or no payment.
That makes sense.
So finances are a big consideration. Just simplification and decluttering.
Yeah.
So we accumulate so much stuff over decades, raising kids, working, stuff like that. And people feel overwhelmed trying to keep up with all of it. Also, lifestyle changes. Just as we age, our lives change. And we might want to do different things with our time, live in a city that's more walkable, be closer to certain amenities. So depending on our lifestyle, we're going to have to adapt or change.
And do you think, like, what role do you think, as somebody's aging, what are things about that experience or that cycle or that where they are in the lifespan that might make them want to downsize? Is it specific to, a certain part of aging or a certain phase of life that might spark somebody to want to make that change?
Yeah, I think retirement's a big one.
Okay.
People in retirement, often kids are leaving, they're empty nesters, they're retiring. They don't want to spend their time anymore and they don't have the reason to stay in a large home with rooms for all the kids and things like that. So just wanting to spend their time differently, but also health issues might come up. Yeah. That's what happened with my mom. And they needed to move to an area with better resources.
Oh, that makes sense.
And specialists.
So location change too. Sometimes not just downsizing to the bigger home to the smaller house, but they might be actually changing
location, moving across the country. Also, people want to spend more time with the people they love. And they want to make the most of that time. And so they might move to be closer to kids who've moved away.
That makes sense.
And start a family somewhere else. So they want to be close to their grandkids. So priorities and values really change and shift as we age.
Maybe you realize what's important at that point, or I know it's hard sometimes when you're working and caught up in work and kids. And but I can see once somebody hits retirement age and has maybe more time on their hand to spend with family, wanting to be closer.
And then also safety and accessibility.
Okay, so give me some examples
as we age,
of that.
Let's say that I just recently had hip surgery or my stability isn't as good and I want to be able to be in a home with just single level living. So I want stairs is a good example. Or I might move to a facility with larger doorways. So I have more accessibility if I need...
If you had a walker.
Or wheelchair or something like that. Or if my spouse had a walker or wheelchair. So a lot of people will downsize and shift into a home that better meets their safety needs.
I was going to ask if it made a difference if somebody is single, whether it's widowed or just maybe they've always been single and as they age, or if it's a couple. Is there any specifics to that, or it's just something that's sort of across the board we see people doing as they get older?
I think being a couple and being single is a big differentiating factor, because if it's a couple and your spouse passes away, you may not have the resources, physical, financial, emotional, to take care of a large home like that. You may need help with certain like health issues
Right.
that the spouse was helping you with,
Right. Like part of what they did to care for the house, or maybe if they were,
even if they were caring for you.
that makes sense.
And then also, if you're taking care of a spouse, you might need help from like an adult child with your finances, with emotional support, with helping take care of you while you help take care of somebody else. So moving closer to family, downsizing to a more manageable house, and having something closer to the resources that you need are all factors contributing both to the aging process and to how we deal and adapt with it.
And it sounds like that's a lot of change, right? That's a lot of decisions to make if you're moving to a smaller location, but also if you're having to build more, like reestablish your resources, right? So like reestablish your medical team, reestablish if you have an attorney or a financial advisor, if you're moving locations, like what are some of the challenges that people face with downsizing and moving, especially if they're going to a new location, like you said, to be closer to adult children or just closer to resources, whatever it may be.
Yeah, so just establishing all of those really important connections with advisors, with healthcare, doctors, even counselors, clergy, finding a new church, all of the things that are really important to you, you're going to have to think about how you're going to integrate into a new community.
Which could, to me, that would be overwhelming, but I can imagine, working with older adults, they sometimes like routine and, it could be, I can only imagine that would seem overwhelming. Are there certain things to help or resources to help people navigate those changes, or, where does a person start?
I think that the first thing when you're assessing downsizing just as a whole is to really think about your goals and values.
Okay.
Because those are going to drive all of the decisions that you make. Sometimes people downsize based on the goals and values of somebody else.
Right.
Like your kids or your spouse or your community, but really sit and think about what your life looks like now, how much time you have, and how you want to spend that time. A lot of times people have more time.
Right.
They're not working. They're not taking care of kids. And so they actually have time to do all of the things that they said one day they were going to do.
Right. Do they do them?
They do. A lot of people do.
I make lists of someday I'm going to do this, and I don't know if I'm ever going to get to that day, but.
Or they look at the someday list and they think, that doesn't matter to me anymore.
Okay.
Like I don't care.
Right. My priorities shifted.
My priorities have shifted. My health is different. Some people have more energy and are healthier as they age. And so they're able to travel and do all the things they wanted to. Some people have limitations. And so they're having to change and shift their priorities. So first is just assess your values and goals.
Okay.
And then start to think and give yourself a lot of time. You can't downsize in a month.
Well, and I hear people say you mentioned, like if you lose a spouse or a loved one, like not to make a big decision within that first year. So I can see we're giving yourself time.
Right.
I would guess it takes some research. Like, I don't know. It seems like a lot of moving parts.
I would say it takes a good year.
Okay.
From the time that you think, maybe I want to downsize or I want to find a different living situation, to the time that you're in that new facility,
right,
adjusting to the change, making friends, finding all of those services.
Right.
It's probably a good year of, and it's decluttering.
Yeah.
So it's going through not just those specific items, but it's decluttering your financial information.
Yeah.
You're really looking at everything, all the paperwork, all of the inputs and outputs, and you're deciding what's important, what matters, what you need to take with you into this next phase of life, and then what you can let go of and what you no longer want to carry forward.
And then what do you do with all that stuff? Like I can imagine right now if I had to downsize and get rid of all the stuff in my house, like I have trouble cleaning a closet. So like what does a person do if they're going from say 5,000 square feet and they're going to move into a 1,200 square foot condo or retirement facility, whatever it may be? Like what do you do with all that stuff? Where do you even start?
So I think the starting point again is what are my values and goals?
Yeah.
And then I like to look at everything and say, does this align with who I want to be moving forward? Like I used to keep business suits for decades because I used to work in the business world and I wanted to one day.
You're not wearing them?
I'm not wearing them anymore. I finally got rid of them. Okay. But we have these emotional attachments, not just to the thing, but to the person we were at the time of that thing. It might be connected to our children or our marriage or, our professional identity.
Right.
So look at the things and identify, does this object or this thing reflect who I want to be moving forward? And do I have room?
I was going to say, even just thinking about the the number of closets you're going to have, the number of rooms, you're going to end up with a lot of excess stuff. And so, I know a lot of people will say, oh, I'll give it all to my kids. But the reality is their kids already have a lot of their own stuff. So what do people do with it?
So first you can ask your kids or friends, like I just gave away all my knitting supplies because I don't have time to knit.
You're not going to knit?
I'm not going to knit.
In your business suit?
In my business suit. Yes, I could do a whole series on the people I used to be.
Okay.
But I gave it to somebody who just started knitting. So that felt good to me.
Okay.
Didn't feel like trashing it
Right.
or just giving it to somebody I didn't know. You can ask family and friends and then just be respectful of the fact that they may not want it.
Right.
And then donating stuff, but find a cause that you really care about. You don't have to donate it just to the closest facility. You can find something that matters to you. You can sell it.
Okay.
A lot of stuff can be sold online or on Facebook Marketplace or in a garage sale or a community
Right.
sale. You can recycle a lot of objects, and some things need to be thrown away.
Yeah.
Anything that's not usable or completely.
That would be, I mean, like you said, there's an emotional tie to the things you accumulate. So I would think that that would be a part of the process that's particularly challenging is letting go of that emotional attachment that if you've lived in a house your whole life and you're now downsizing, how do you deal with that emotional aspect of it? And like you said, kind of letting go.
Letting go. And when my kids were little, I saved all their baby clothes.
Yeah.
And we moved a lot. And I eventually got tired of moving those clothes. So I had quilts made.
Oh, that's a good
pieces of their
idea.
clothes and then
Yeah.
their birth dates stitched on the side. So you can take something that really mattered to you and find a new way to use it that pairs it down.
That makes
or you can take pictures and put them in a photo album of something, or you can find somebody who would value it in the same way or a different way than you valued it. But the key is to look at it and take a moment, right?
Right.
We always think we're going to help somebody by throwing a bunch of stuff in trash bags and then moving it for them. But it's a process, and it's an emotional process as much as a physical process, and it's physically demanding and tiring.
I can imagine.
It is exhausting going through
Yeah.
just a closet, let alone a home.
Yeah. And so who, like, say you don't have adult children to help, your adult children are busy, you hire the real estate agent, right? I would guess you're selling one place and finding another one, but, who else helps in that process if you don't have family support? Because I would guess the real estate agent's only going to do so much.
Yeah.
But like you said, the packing up, the sorting through, how do people manage that?
So they have professional organizers can come.
Okay.
And they are
now.
I know. They are professionals.
Yeah.
And they're professionals in both the physical sorting and the emotional. They're not going to push you and shove you and, they're going to help you go through the entire process of organizing, sorting, decluttering, managing. Care managers are really helpful in this role. They can help with the big picture.
Right.
And looking at all of the different pieces that need to be put together, including the decluttering.
Right.
They're also really good with the emotional side of it and kind of pausing at important moments.
Yeah.
You can hire movers who specialize in moving seniors. So then they're going to have the skills, the mental health skills, the physical ability, all of the big picture stuff to help a senior person move, which is different than if you're helping like a young family or something like that.
And I would assume if you're, like you said, sometimes it's just retirement. I have more time on my hands. I might have a more active role in downsizing and choosing where I want to go. But what about people? What if it's a situation where maybe you had a hospitalization or a healthcare crisis or something happened that's forced you to make this move, but you're really not in a position to be able to do as much of the process as you would want to. How do those people make that transition in downsizing?
A lot of times family comes in. I have a friend who her father was hospitalized and then they went in and the apartment was like a hoarding situation.
Yeah.
And nobody had been in the apartment obviously for years.
Right.
Because he'd always managed to do things outside of the apartment. So they were totally unprepared for and they hired a professional cleaning and sorting crew to come in and help them. So you can have family, but there are times where it's beyond the scope of what a family member could do or friends.
Right.
And then they had to think about, he moved to a care facility for rehabilitation.
Okay. So that was like a temporary.
It was temporary, but he was never going to be able to go back and live there alone. Right. Yeah. And so there was this very emotional and financial and physical.
Because you're in crisis and you're dealing with the downside.
And so people's attention gets diverted into all different directions in a situation like that, which is why it's better to think about downsizing when you're not faced with downsizing.
Yeah, I think that's a great point because I've seen families too where again, maybe one spouse was the caregiver and that spouse ended up in a healthcare crisis. And so all of a sudden the family's dealing with multiple changes at once and having to face a move or a downsize. But if you've thought about it ahead of time and where kind of you'd want your next phase of life to be, I'm sure that does make it easier for people. Are there specific tips that you would have or things you would avoid that you found in your research when people are choosing to downsize?
Yes, I actually have a list.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Okay. So
I like a list.
First of all, we talked about your personal goals. So these are things like considerations when you're considering the why.
Okay.
Think about your personal goals, your lifestyle, your financial considerations, the emotional attachment you have, not just to the property, but the place,
Right.
your community, your neighborhood, your church, all of the
People
things
you've grown up with.
Yeah, think about your day-to-day life and how attached you are to that, and give respect to that. Your health and mobility needs.
Okay.
Your social connection. Like you said, the space and the organization.
Yeah, the actual
Physical. I only
part
have
of
3
it.
closets.
Yeah,
So
that's the part I would fixate on.
do I need to rent a storage unit? What
where's
do
this
I need
going
to
to
do?
fit? Yeah.
And then timing and transition. So
The when and
the when and you don't want to be trying to move in the middle of winter if you don't have to, or you want to think about the housing market when the best time is to sell your house and then back that up a couple months for prepping the house.
Yeah, you have to
all those things.
Like you need one to sell before you buy the next one sometimes. So it's I mean, that's a lot to.
Yeah. So create a timeline.
Okay.
That's really important actually, because these things go like,
And like really write it down.
yeah, really write it down.
Yeah.
Like I'm going to do this first. And then
Step 1, step 2.
Yeah. Develop a plan for decluttering. So just saying we're going to declutter the house this weekend. It's a really big.
Because you just keep looking.
You just
at
keep
it.
looking, and then things keep getting taken out of the closets, and you get overwhelmed. So just whether it's room by room or object by object or whatever it is, figure out a plan for it. Seek help from family, friends, and professionals. Start early.
Yeah.
Focus on the benefits and the positives, because there's tons of benefits. There's a lot of relief that comes when you get rid of stuff, or just make a decision.
Yeah.
Even if you decide, I'm going to downsize but stay in this town, just having made the decision brings people a lot of relief. And there are a lot of positives that are coming ahead.
Yeah.
Focusing on that helps you have energy and momentum to continue doing the hard work. Prepare for the emotional toll.
Yeah. And know that it's okay.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
I think it's a normal, expected part of it. And people sometimes feel bad for being overwhelmed or stressed out or emotional. But I think knowing that that's a healthy part of the process, really, and going through that experience, I think that's a good point.
And we talk a lot in counseling about holding 2 things at the same time. 2 things can be true. This is really terrible and awful, and it's the best decision for me right now.
Yeah.
Instead of but, we always try to use an and.
That's a great point.
So it's really good when you're having those overwhelming emotions to acknowledge the emotion and then sit with it, and then, have the and then the positive side of it too.
Yeah. And that was one of my, questions. That's kind of a good lead in, is we talked about like all the prep and thought that goes into it, going through that process, but what's on the other side? Right? What's in the other side once that person has made the move, they're in the new location, they've done the decluttering. What do you think then that person's experience is?
I think there's probably, I've seen it, it's a lot of initial disappointment, I guess.
Yeah, that's probably a part of it for sure.
You have all that energy and momentum of doing it, and then you get there and you may not see your family as often as you had anticipated. Things might be different. Your day-to-day schedule might be different. The church didn't end up being the best fit for you.
It's okay to be disappointed.
And it's okay to be disappointed. It's okay to go through a period of even sadness or depression. These are normal things. After any change, even if the change is quote unquote positive,
right,
it's still a change and it takes adjustment.
Give yourself that time to adjust.
Right.
Yeah. And then what, you do all of this work. What is hopefully kind of the silver lining at the end of the day, once you've gone through all of this change and you've given yourself time to adjust, do you find that people are typically happy that they made the choice to do this? Is there, what happens if somebody changes their mind?
So my mom downsized 3 times.
Oh my gosh.
Like in 2 years. And her husband, my stepfather, had cancer, which was the motivating factor for moving. And she would move and find something and it didn't work out.
Okay.
And then she'd have to redo the thing. And finally she ended up in a place that is perfect for her.
Okay.
Both when her husband was alive and now that he's passed. It's a really good fit. But it took a couple of
To get it
tries
right.
to get it right. And I think that one of the benefits of downsizing and going through the process is you see you can do it.
Right.
You can make the change. You can adapt if it doesn't work out. You can find something better on the other side.
It may happen more than once.
And it may happen more than once. And now she's got all this time on her hands. And now she's thinking, okay, now what does she want to do?
Well, she could help other people downsize.
She could. She'd probably be really good.
We found a second, third career for
all of
her.
our houses.
Yeah, yeah.
So it's a process. I had a friend who her husband hated to travel. And so when he passed, he told her right before, he said, we've saved all this money, so go travel.
Okay.
So she downsized, and she did. She traveled with her church all over the world.
That's funny.
And she downsized so that she didn't have commitments at home.
Right.
So she was closer to an airport, and so that it was easier for her to do that.
Which goes back to knowing like your values and priorities and what's important to you.
And I think that's what drives
you
the other
age.
side. Even if it's difficult going through the process, and even if you feel a little depressed or sad, you might be depleted of energy, things like that. When you remember the why and you clearly identified your goals, it's much easier to transition through those feelings.
Yeah. And getting on the other side of that transition, I would guess, like you said, is kind of a sense of relief and maybe sometimes an adjustment or some sadness, but ultimately some sense of relief and then kind of rebuilding that support network
Right.
around you.
And there's a lot of, I think, pride in knowing that you can do it.
Yeah.
That you can adapt and
You
change.
accomplished something. It's a great point. All right. Well, thank you for great
Thank
tips
you.
today. Appreciate it. It was great to talk with you.
You too. Thanks.